Hey guys, Pike here. This is your video for Unit 12, Cardiovascular System Part 1. We are going to be looking at the heart structure today. And so the cardiovascular system is just a closed system, meaning no parts of this system are open to the outside, like say your digestive system or respiratory system or urinary system. This system is all closed, and it's made up of our heart, made up of the heart, which is a pump. It's pumping blood, and all of our blood vessels, which are transporting that blood, circulating it to the body. So the main function of the cardiovascular system is just transportation, transporting substances around the body. So the blood vessels would be all of the highways, and where everything is traveling in, all substances are floating in the bloodstream. The heart would be like the FedEx main station, okay? And new red blood cells are being produced via hematopoiesis and our red bone marrow. And then they are used to carry oxygen around to the body. So let's just go ahead and start looking at the heart anatomy. So we're going to look at the location and size first. The location is located, we know it's in our chest, in our thoracic cavity, but it's actually 2/3 of your heart is located to the left of your midline. That's why we put our right hand over our left side of our chest when we're saying the Pledge of Allegiance. We're putting our hand over our heart. It is in the thorax and it is between the lungs in the inferior mediastinum. We had this when we looked at body cavities. The mediastinum is just that middle space, that middle cavity in your chest, in your thorax. The pointed apex, the bottom part of your heart, that little point, it points not directly down. It points over to your left hip, and that's where you would place a stethoscope, because that's where your blood is being pumped out to your lungs and to your body. And it's about the size of your fist, and it weighs a little less than a pound. All right, and I've got a picture right here where you can see this pointed apex right here is pointing down towards your left hip. This right here is the diaphragm, the muscle of respiration, of breathing. And so your heart kind of is laying down on that, okay? And we can see that this right here is our midline. So 2/3 of your heart is located to the left of that midline, okay? And so you also see the dotted line here. You see that midline, just similar to this picture right up here. See where that's located. But we have this whole space, and I didn't mean to go that far up. This whole space in our chest, that is the mediastinum, that middle cavity in your chest. Okay? Moving on down, let's look at the heart coverings first. Remember that all of our organs are like presents to ourselves, and they all have wrapping paper. The heart has 3 layers of wrapping paper, very thin wrapping paper, but important. And so the generic term, and we've already looked at this before, is called the pericardium. The pericardium. We talked about this when we did body cavities. I think that was in Unit 2. This literally just means around the heart. And the pericardium is a double-walled sac around the heart. The first one that you come to is going to be called the fibrous pericardium. Fibrous pericardium. It's made of dense fibrous connective tissue. It's loose and superficial, and it's kind of like thin, fragile tissue paper. Then what's deep to that is the serous pericardium. We looked at all of these in Unit 2. And that's deep to the fibrous pericardium, and it's composed of 2 layers. And these 2 layers are parietal and visceral, that we've also had before. And remember, there is serous fluid in between. So the outside layer is going to be our parietal pericardium. Parietal pericardium. Parietal means the outer layer on the outside of that cavity. The inner layer, the layer that touches the organ, is called the visceral pericardium, because viscera means organ in a cavity. So the visceral layer is actually the layer next to the heart. This layer is also known as the epicardium. So it's also known as the outermost layer of the wall, of the heart wall, and I'll show you that in a picture. And then we know if you have serous layers in between those two parietal and visceral layers, you have serous fluid that lubricates movement in between those layers. Okay? And then the heart wall, we'll put the words in and then I will go show it to you on your picture. The heart wall itself has 3 layers also. So there's really 3 layers of wrapping paper, and there's 3 layers of the heart wall. But altogether, there's only 5 layers because 2 of them are the same. So I'll show you that in a picture in just a minute. The outermost layer of the heart wall is called the epicardium, which means upon the heart. The epicardium is the outside layer, and it is also synonymous. It's the same thing as the visceral pericardium. So the innermost layer of the wrapping paper is also the outermost layer of the heart itself. And so they are actually the same exact thing. So you just call them something different based on if you're talking about the coverings or you're talking about the wall itself. The middle layer of the heart wall is where the muscle actually is located, the cardiac muscle, and that's the myocardium. Remember, myo means muscle. So this is the actual cardiac muscle tissue that causes the heart to contract and to pump blood. The innermost layer of the heart wall, the wall that is that actually what blood touches, okay, the innermost layer, that is called the endo. Remember, endo means inside. The endocardium, inside the heart. And this is the layer that will become a blood vessel. So the innermost layer is continuous with our blood vessels. So you can't really tell where the heart ends and a blood vessel begins because they are continuous. A homeostatic imbalance here is pericarditis. This is inflammation of the pericardium, of the wrapping papers, and it could be very serious. It could cause painful adhesions, and it can be caused by repeated bacterial infections. This is what this will cause a decrease in the serous fluid. All right, so let's look at this picture right here of the heart wall and the coverings. Okay, and so first let's go out to in. So let's look at and we see what's being pulled out right here. That's why I like for you to see the hole and know what we're pulling out. And so we're going to first do the heart wall. So this outermost layer is the fibrous pericardium. Fibrous pericardium. Very loose and superficial. And then we have the second layer, and we have down here the third layer. Now, remember, I'm going to put a dotted line. If you remember when we did this, yes, it was Unit 2, so that was a long time ago, right? The serous pericardium is really one layer that's folded over, kind of like a tortilla when you make a taco, right? But the outermost layer has a different name than the innermost layer. The outermost layer is the parietal layer. And so here, since it's around the heart, is the parietal pericardium. And then the innermost layer is the visceral pericardium, because it's actually touching the heart. But always know that that's really one layer, it's just folded over. Okay? And then we know that in between those two layers, you're going to find serous fluid. Okay? And now, those are the 3 layers of the coverings around the heart. The 3 layers of the actual heart wall, I am going to use a different color and point to that same layer. Okay? Because number 3 of the heart coverings and number 1 here of the heart wall are the same thing. For some reason, they gave them 2 different names, but really the innermost layer of the wrapping paper is actually part of the present. So you like pull off 2 layers of wrapping paper and the third you can't get off because it's actually part of the present. So I know that sounds so weird, okay? The outermost layer of the heart wall is called the epicardium, which means around the heart, upon the heart. And then the middle layer here that is the cardiac muscle tissue, that is the myocardium. The myocardium. Myo means muscles. That's our muscle layer. The innermost layer that actually is lining the inside of the heart, that is the endocardium. Endocardium. Okay. And then here is where you would have blood. Okay, this is the inside of the heart right here. Okay. And then all of this purple on the side here is a blood vessel. Okay. And so you can see how the heart coverings are attached to that in the heart wall. So the 3 layers of heart coverings and the 3 layers of the heart wall. All right, so let's move down here and get inside the heart. We're going to look at the heart chambers. We're going to compare and contrast the left and right as they deal with oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. The 2 chambers, the superior chambers of the heart, are the 2 atria, okay, of which you have the right atrium and the left atrium. Atria is plural, atrium is singular. Then the inferior chambers of the heart are called the ventricles, of which we have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. And remember, right and left are backwards on paper, so when we label them, they're going to be backwards. The atria are the receiving chambers. If you have an atrium in a hotel or in a large mansion, instead of a foyer, it would be called an atria, or an atrium, where there would be an outside little courtyard. It's a receiving place. The atrium in a hotel is where everybody gathers, is where they're received into the hotel. And so the receiving chambers is where blood comes into the heart. The ventricles are the discharging or the pumping chambers where blood leaves the heart. So blood is always going to flow in through the atria and out through the ventricles. Now, there is a wall that divides the 2 sides of the heart, the right and left sides of the heart, and that is called the septum. The septum divides the heart longitudinally, and so if it's in between the ventricles, it's called the interventricular septum. If it's in between the atria, it's called the interatrial septum. And so now, those are the 4 rooms, the 4 chambers. Okay, there's 4 rooms in the heart, like two different townhouses next door. There's an upstairs and a downstairs, and the next door neighbors have an upstairs and a downstairs. To go from upstairs and downstairs, there's a door, and in the heart, those doors are called valves, but they're like swinging doors, like 2 French doors, and they only open in one direction to let blood flow in one direction. Their purpose is not to open back and forth. They open and allow blood to flow in one direction. So think of like French doors that open and then close. The valves that we find in the heart, there's 2 different sections of valves that we are going to talk about. And the first are called the atrioventricular valves, because they are in between the atria and the ventricles. So they're called atrioventricular valves, or you're going to see it as AV valves. Okay? And there's 2 AV valves because there's one on the left side of the heart between the right and left between the right ventricle and right atrium, and the one on the left side between the left atrium and left ventricle. And so the one that's on the left side of the heart is called the bicuspid valve. Bicuspid valve. Or, it has another name and we need to learn it because they're both used. Or the mitral valve. And those are on the left side of the heart. The valve, the atrioventricular valve that's on the right side of the heart, is called the tricuspid valve. And we're going to label all these in this video, okay? So the bicuspid and the tricuspid. Cusp are attachments, these little strings. They're attached by these strings of connective tissue, like really strict, I don't know why I can't talk right now, really strong cords of connective tissue of collagen fibers. And the bicuspid has 2 sets of these cords, and the tricuspid has 3 sets of these cords. So the AV valves are anchored in place, and these cords are actually called chordae tendineae. Very Latin. Chordae tendineae are cords of connective tissue that hold on the AV valves, and they're actually called our heartstrings. So if you ever heard that phrase, "you're tugging on my heartstrings," you actually have heartstrings. You probably heard that phrase and you're like, what the crap are they talking about? They're actually saying chordae tendineae, okay? And so I'll show you what those are in a minute. These AV valves are only open when the heart is relaxed and closed when the heart is contracting. And so we'll talk about that when we do blood flow. The next set of valves are called our semilunar valves. These semilunar valves look like little half moons, hence the name semilunar, and they're between the ventricle and an artery leaving the heart. So these are not like up here, doors between 2 rooms, between an atrium and a ventricle. These are doors to actually leave the heart altogether, doors to leave. So the one that's in between, or between the right ventricle and an artery called the pulmonary trunk, that is called the pulmonary semilunar valve. They're named by what artery that blood is about to enter into. So it makes it kind of easy. If you know the artery, then you know the valve. Pulmonary semilunar, because the blood is about to leave the heart and enter the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary deals with your lungs, so that blood is going to your lungs. The next semilunar valve is between the left ventricle and the aorta, so it's called the aortic semilunar valve. So know your vessels, you know your valves. So that is where blood is leaving the heart to go out to the body. The aorta is the largest artery. Okay, and these valves are going to work in a different opposite function than the AV valves, and that is going to force a one-way flow of blood through the heart, and we'll see that when we do blood flow. I'm going to let you look over your homeostatic imbalances. The valves can be faulty, and the doors could not shut correctly, and that causes a leakage of blood to go backwards. And so there's a lot of different problems that can be caused by doors or valves that don't shut. All right, so let's look at the vessels, the great vessels that bring blood to the heart or away from the heart. So first, we want to look at the great vessels. We'll talk about arteries. So first, the arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. I always think AA, arteries away. And so the largest artery in the body is your aorta, and it arches over the heart. And when we come back from spring break, we're gonna do all the branches of the aorta, ascending, descending, all of that. But for right now, we are just gonna look at what is right at the heart. And then you have an artery that leaves the right ventricle, and that is called the pulmonary trunk. That is taking blood to the lungs. Pulmon means lungs. And it's a trunk because then it's about to split into a right and left. And then next you have the pulmonary arteries. After the trunk, they split into a right and left pulmonary artery. Then the major veins we have. Veins are going to bring blood back to the heart, towards the heart, from the body or from the lungs. And so the major veins bringing blood back from the body are the superior, one bringing blood from the top half of the body, and the inferior bringing blood from the bottom half of the body, vena cava. And so if I'm looking at them together, I would put an E on the end. Singular, we would just say A. And then we have pulmonary veins bringing blood back from the lungs. And the lungs is where we're picking up oxygen. Okay, that's where oxygen enters our body. All right, so now let's actually go and look at some of these vessels, and then I'm going to open up the heart and look at it. So this is an intact heart, all right? And so if you did not have all of these tubes coming out of the heart, it would look like a traditional heart that you do like with your hands, like if you're doing it on Instagram or whatever, okay? But with the vessels, you don't really see it exactly like that. First, let's do the major arteries. So here we have, this is your aorta. That's the aorta. Right here is the pulmonary trunk. And then it splits into a right, I'm sorry, that's the left. Goodness. Why did I make that mistake? That is the left pulmonary artery. And over here, it splits and goes underneath the aorta and behind this other one. This is our right pulmonary artery. And then, so those are the major arteries. The major veins right here, bringing blood back to the heart. This is my superior vena cava. And then bringing blood back to the heart from the lower part of the body is the inferior vena cava. Okay. And then the other veins bringing blood back from the lungs are the right pulmonary veins. There are two on each side instead of the one for the pulmonary artery, and we'll talk about that when we draw blood flow. Over here are the left pulmonary veins. Okay. So remember, everything is backwards on paper, okay? So those are the major vessels that we can label in this intact heart. So now let's look at a heart where it has been cut in a sagittal plane, not sagittal, frontal coronal. I'm having difficulties thinking this morning. I am so sorry. I promise I know what I'm talking about. So this has been cut in a frontal or coronal plane. And so now let's look, that way we can see all four chambers at once. So that's the only way that we could cut the heart, where we could see all four chambers. Okay, if we did it in a sagittal section, we wouldn't be able to, or if we did it in a transverse or horizontal. And so, yes, it looks crazy, and it doesn't look exactly like 4 rooms, but just stay with me here, okay? For one, don't draw this, okay? I'm going to erase what I'm doing, but here's a room, here's a room, here's a room. I know this looks crazy. I'm about to erase all this. I just want you to, see. And then here's another room, okay? So that looks really crazy. Let me erase that, okay? But I wanted you to kind of see. So let's start over here on the left side. So right here, maybe I'll do it, yeah. So right here is my left atrium. That is my left atrium. And you see holes right here, okay, where blood is going to be brought back in. We'll talk about that in a second. So that's the left atrium. So then over here is my right atrium. And these two are the receiving chambers. They receive blood from the body. And so here they're going to be receiving blood from up here. Here's a hole, okay? And down here, here's a hole. There's another hole over here that's bringing blood back from your coronary circulation, the blood that goes to the heart wall and back. Okay, so this is the right and left atria. So then down here, you have the left ventricle. Ventricles are much larger chambers, much larger rooms. And then here is the right ventricle. And the ventricles are where blood is pumped out. So those are the 4 chambers. The atria are smaller, the receiving rooms are smaller than the discharging or pumping rooms. So then let's look at our valves. Let's start with our AV valves. And so all of this white right here, all of that is a valve. Okay? So all of that right there is our, that's on the left side. So this is the bicuspid or mitral valve. Bicuspid or mitral valve. And I'm just going to show you the flaps. I'm going to well, no, let's not do that. So I'm just going to put dotted lines down here, so you can really still see it. Those are the French doors. So those dotted lines are the French doors. Everything else that was white right there that's now yellow, that's all the connective tissue, the cords called chordae tendineae. Those are our heartstrings. And so you see how we have two main cusps? Okay? And so I'm going to put a dot on either one. Over here, the other AV valve, and it kind of looks like it has four cusps, but it really doesn't. Okay, it really has, this is kind of a two that are together. And so this valve right here is the tricuspid valve. You just have to, I always remembered right tri. Tricuspid is on the right tri. The tricuspid valve. So those are our two atrioventricular valves. How blood goes from the atria, and the doors open, and then down into the ventricles. Then we have two other valves where blood is going to leave the heart, not just go from room to room, but actually leave and enter a vessel to go out to the lungs or the body. And so they look like two little half moons. So right here in the middle, I'm just going to accentuate right here. It kind of looks like a little baby's butt. Okay, I know that's so weird, all right? But right here looks like two little half moons. That's why it's called semi-lunar. And so I'm going to pull this out right over here. Okay, and so right here, these are the pulmonary semilunar valve, because that blood is entering the pulmonary trunk. So that valve is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay. Another valve is behind that pulmonary trunk, and so it's harder to see, but it's right here. Do you see these little babies' butts right here? It is harder to see that little baby's butt, but that right there, entering the aorta, which goes behind that pulmonary trunk, those are your aorta, or that is your aortic semilunar valve. The aortic semilunar valve. Okay, hang with me, just have a little bit more, okay? And this one's a decent amount of labeling. We're also going to draw one of these together in class on, later this week, Thursday, Friday. Okay? And so let's label our vessels also. So those are all heart structures, okay? And so the next ones I'll do in a different color because they're not part of the heart, they're just the vessels around the heart. So here we have the aorta, the largest artery taking blood away from the heart. Another artery we have here, this is our pulmonary trunk. And when we do blood flow, I'm going to talk about the reason why we have red and blue here. Okay, showing you different colors because of the different types of oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. Then that pulmonary trunk is going to split into a left pulmonary artery. The left pulmonary artery, and I write kind of big, so I know it gets kind of crazy around here. And then the right pulmonary artery goes underneath the aorta where it arches, the aortic arch, and behind the superior vena cava. And over here we have the right pulmonary artery. The right pulmonary artery. And then up here we have the superior vena cava. And then down here we have the inferior vena cava. And then last, I'm going to point to this wall all the way down the middle of the heart, and that wall is the septum. The septum. So I'm going to show you this whole thing. So you can go and pause right here. I'm going to stop this video. We're going to do circulation in class, and we're going to draw a heart. So Pike out.